everybody, Bauer Brown here. Welcome back to the channel, guys. In the video that I have for you guys today, we're going to be going over map sizes. All right. So something I've been wanting to go over for a little bit now because it's going to play an important role in some future tutorials, right? I'm going to start a new series at some point, and we're going to need to know a little bit about this, okay, about map sizes. Now, I know many of you probably think you have it nailed and you know all about map sizes. You got 3 different map sizes that you normally work with or that you can choose from, right? And you would be wrong. Sorry about that, but you would be. But how do you come about this size? Does anybody know how this even comes about? Okay, so what we're looking at here is my tutorial series map, which is a 2-kilometer map. This is a default standard map size. Okay, so how do we get to that 2048 by 2048? All right, well, there's 3 components that, well, there's a few components that come into play here, but I'm going to focus on 3 of them right now. Okay, one of those components is a mesh. Okay, and looking here, what you see highlighted, you know, this little grid that we're looking at, that would be the mesh. Okay, that I'm talking about. We're going to use a multiplier. All right. And well, of sorts, I'm going to call it a multiplier of sorts. Let's just go with that. Okay. So if you look in the attributes panel here, while we have terrain highlighted, I'm going to click on terrain and we have something that's called units per pixel. Okay. And you can see that right here, this 2 units per pixel. All right. So what is that units per pixel? Well, first, like I said, we're going to use that as a multiplier. All right, but what are we multiplying it against? Okay, that's the question here. All right, the next thing I have for you guys is this, which is our DEM, which stands for Digital Elevation Model. This is our height map. Now, as compared to normal textures, right, our terrain textures, those are basically 2-dimensional. We would lay that kind of over top of our grid. It's like painting on our grid, on our mesh, okay? This is a little bit different. This works in a 3rd dimension. Hypothetically. All right. I know I'm confusing already. I know, but I'm good at that. All right. So we got this here is a size of 1020. Well, it's 1025, but I'll get to that a little bit later. But for now, I'm going to drop that extra pixel and we're just going to go with 1024 this way, 1024 this way. Okay. But then we also had a 3rd element, hypothetically, which is a vertical element. So we have a 3rd dimension. Okay. Now, this is where the multiplier comes into play. All right. Now, that multiplier, this 1024 by 1024 at 2 units per pixel. And those units are technically meters. We can consider them to be meters. Sorry, at 2 units per pixel gives us a 2048 by a 2048. All right. So the way that this works with the DEM, okay, it's basically first it's a 16-bit PNG, okay? So it's basically a grayscale image and we work off of a gradient, all right? And that gradient goes from pure black in this instance, okay, which would be pure black would be 0 meters up to the brightest white, pure white, which would be 255 meters, which is the default. That's the default height for, I'll show you what I'm talking about here. The default height scale right here. Default height scale for a standard, well, not even a standard map, just this is your default, right? So if you were to pick up like a Giants map, Elm Creek or the Alpine map or something like that, this will be the height scale. Okay. So that is, we can change that. That height scale can be changed as well as that units per pixel. So they can both change them. All right. So now what about this DEM that we're talking about? So like I said, 0 would be pure black, 255 would be pure white. All right. So that gradient ranging from black to white or white to black, each one of those different shades represents a different height, basically, okay, from 0 to 255. And that's how, you know, if we were to lay this on its side, now it doesn't really work this way. Now, it doesn't actually work this way, but if we were to lay it on its side, you could think about it like this, okay, it would have a look, you know, something like this. Now, this is a little extreme and it's obviously nothing like this, but that's kind of what it represents, right? So each of these, each pixel, right, or each color, you should say, you know, on that gradient represents a different height value. Okay. So depending on, which one of these, which color this lands on, which shade, that represents a different height. All right. So keep this in mind. All right. So it would represent something like this. Right. And this is what, like I said, this is our height map. Okay. So now with that in mind, when you look at what we have here, okay, which is our mesh, you can think of this mesh kind of like a bed sheet, right? So if you take that DEM, thinking about it the way we were looking at it with all those bumps and valleys, and then we, think about it about this size and this mesh being like a bed sheet, and we just kind of lay it down over top of that. Well, all of those bumps and valleys would kind of poke up through the sheet, right? And it would, it would take on the shape of what's beneath it. And that's kind of what's going on here. All right. So if we kind of jump down to the surface there, right, and we can have a look at the mesh and we can see what's going on. Like up in here, you can see, all the elevation differences that's going on there. And that's all dictated by our height map, by our DEM, right, by those colors. Now you could start out with, a plain flat surface here, right on our mesh. And as you start, working with your terrain brushes and adding and taking away, all right, those changes would get saved to your DEM, and if you came back to your DEM in a little while, it would look like this. It would start looking a little bit different shade. Now, this 0 to 255 is only in effect for a default map. You could go out and get real terrain data, real world data from somewhere, okay? And you can get that DEM based on a real life location. And this gradient would mean something a little bit different. Okay. So it might not go all the way down to pure black, but the darkest of the colors might be, for example, 1400 meters. And the brightest part of it might only be 1700 meters. Okay. And that, it's only a difference of 300 meters. All right. Now, like I said, we have that multiplier, that 2 units per pixel. So that takes this 1024 by 1024 and it turns it into a 2048 by 2048, which is our standard size map. Now that multiplier doesn't just affect like the height and the width. And the height and the width, what I mean by that is the dimensions as far as, the height and the width. It also affects the height. Like that 255 meters would technically be 510 meters at 2 units per pixel. All right. Hopefully I'm not confusing you with that there. All right. So let's keep that in mind. All right. So now I know it's a bit confusing to just, if we were trying to, end up at 2048 by 2048, why would we not just make our DEM 2048 by 2048? Well, it depends on a few things, really. A lot of it is we have to, every one of these weight maps that we have here, we have to apply against that. Okay. And right now with our DEM of 1024 by 1024, I know it's 1025, but I'm dropping that pixel. All right. And our weight maps are 2048. It kind of gives us a little bit of a better resolution, right? So one, it matches perfectly with our mesh. And for a DEM, we'd almost have to squeeze that down a little bit, which would give us a better resolution, right? And so that's kind of where this comes into play. Overall, one of the main objectives when we are working on our maps is to keep our file sizes down, right? We don't want these massive file sizes. And the same thing with the DEM. Like I said, this is a 16-bit, so this can get pretty big pretty quick. Now we're only at 1025, but when you start scaling that up, and each one of these images, right? And when I talk about scaling up, keep that in mind as well, that each one of these images, no matter what you're working with, whether it's a weight map, whether it's one of your info layers, your GRLEs, your GDMs, whether it's your DEM, they all work in like a power of 2. Okay. So in power of 2, I mean, you can't just pick like a random, like, okay, I'm going to make this 500 by 500. It would throw some crazy error at you. It's not going to like that. All right. The power of 2, starts at, well, think about it like 256, 512, 1024, 2048, 4096, 8192, and right on up the line. Okay. So that's your power. That's your power of 2. So any one of these files need to go by that rule of thumb there, that standard, that power of 2. All right. So your next size up on your DEM would be a 2048 by a 2048. All right. And then you'd probably want to readjust maybe you wouldn't have to, but maybe you would want to readjust your weight maps to move up to like a 4096, just so you have like a decent resolution, right? You don't want to be working on your map and it looks like you painted it inside of Minecraft, right? You don't want to do that. All right. So there's a lot of things that come into play here. That's why we choose to not just go with a DEM of 2048 by 2048 if that's what our map size is going to be, right? But the key word there is choose. That's why we choose not to do that. We're not locked into these values because we could certainly do that. You could take a DEM size of 2048, a UPP of 1, and that's units per pixel of 1, and it would work. Like I said, you try to get your height maps or your weight maps and stuff like in the ballpark so things look good. You're keeping file sizes down, but there's many different ways that we can get at this value of 2048 by 2048, right? If we're working on a 2-kilometer map. All right. So what's with the extra pixel? Let's tackle that one really quickly while I'm here, because this one comes up really often. And I just want to go over that really quick and see if I can do this without confusing the living heck out of you. All right. So let's take all right. Now, I think dimensionally I might be off here. Okay, we're going to give this a shot and see if this explanation makes any sense to you guys at all. All right, so when we take an image like an 8-bit doesn't matter, but say we take an image like one of our weight maps, right, for our textures, and we're going to count the resolution on that. All right, now at a 1024 by 1024, actually, let's do it this way. On a 2-dimensional image. Okay, now I'm going to talk about faces and vertices, all right? And any of you guys that have been dabbling in Blender or any other 3D program are familiar with these terms, all right? And in a nutshell, right, each one of these triangles would be a face. Well, let's consider the square. Let's just consider the square a face. And the intersection of those squares right here, each one of these intersections would be a vertice. All right, so if you can think of like I said, 2 dimensionals, if we were going to paint, onto this canvas, we would be doing that through the faces. We would paint right onto the faces. But if we wanted to affect the height, the terrain height, it would almost be like grabbing one of these vertices, right, and just pulling it up. And that would affect all the faces around it and pull that up with it, right? So that's how we get, little mountains and bumps and stuff like that. All right, so on a 2-dimensional, with something like our one of our terrain weight maps here. So we'll figure out we're gonna count the resolution through the faces because that's 2-dimensional. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. All right. So let's say we have a resolution of 11, 11 by 11. So 11 this way and 11 that way. Okay. So that's how, and I'm not sure there's 11 that way, but let's pretend there is. All right, so that's how we figured out our resolution. All right, 11 by 11. And that was for a weight map or just a regular texture or something like that. All right, but our height map, our DEM, is a little bit different because we work in that 3rd dimension, right? And remember what I said about these vertices here? The vertices is basically what's controlling our elevation. All right, so we're not gonna, when we're talking about resolution, we're not working with faces anymore. We're working with vertices. So that's how we're going to count our resolution, right? We're going to count vertices, not actual faces. All right. So let's do this over again, except this time let's count our vertices. All right. So we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So can you see what happened there? All right. So using faces, and like any one of our like our weight maps or our texture files, right, at a 1024 by 1024 count faces, that came out even. But when we counted the vertices, we got an extra one. Okay. So now, does that make any sense to you guys? That's why that extra pixel is there. So only your height map. That's the only place you're going to see that extra pixel. Right. And that's because they're actually, when you count vertices, there actually is an extra pixel. All right. So hopefully that made a little bit of sense. I know sometimes I have a habit of butchering these explanations, but I wanted to get that out of the way because that's something that comes up very, very often. All right. So the next thing I want to touch on, all right, and I want to go over this and we're going to circle back to this once or twice, all right, is our map sizes. All right. So we have our default sizes. Well, we only really have one default size, and that's your standard map size of 2048 by 2048. Anything above that or below that is going to be a mod map. All right. But the three, as far as community standards that we work with, now I'm going to go into the X. We're going to call it the X factor. Right. The community likes to call it a 1X, a 4X, and a 16X. Okay. Now, we've been trying really hard to get away from that. One, it's confusing, and I'll tell you in a minute why it's confusing. It just doesn't it makes sense only in certain conditions. If the conditions are right, then it makes sense. All right. But I've seen guys use it completely wrong, and then everybody else is confused by it because they think, they mean one thing, and the guy that's saying it is confused by what he even means. Like I had a guy say, I have a 16-kilometer map, and like 16 kilometers. Holy Christ, man. That thing, it's a massive, massive map. And here he just meant like a 16X. All right. So the 4X and the 16X, they're talking about how many times bigger than your default map. All right. And then that default being a 1X, I hear people call it a 2X. Well, what is it? 2 times bigger than what? So we try to stick with kilometers, okay? Because that UPP, it's units, that's kilometers basically, right? So you can figure that, 2048 by 28 is 2048 by 2048 is 2 kilometers. 4096 is 4 kilometers, and you get the idea. All right. So why can't we stick with that? Why, if everybody understands it, why can we not just stick with that? All right, well, let me explain that to you. We're going to come back to that. Remember that. We're going to come back to that in a minute. We're going to double back again to map sizes. All right, so with these map sizes, that 2048 by 2048 are default map size. Like I said, there's a few different ways you can get there. All right, and with our height map of a 1024, like I said, I know it's 1025, but that 1024 by 1024, a UPP of 2, right, would give us 2048 by 2048, which is what we have. But we could go with a DEM of 2048 and a UPP of 1. That each one of those you can do anything you want with that DEM and the UPP. All right. So when we jump up now, how many guys know how to properly scale up a map? All right. I'm guessing half of you probably do. The other half think you do. And no offense. I don't mean any offense by that. And I see this happen all the time in the forums. People say, "Hey, how do I build a 4X?" And there I am saying, 4X, 4 kilometer, but that's the way you said it. So I'm going to use that as my defense. So he wants to scale up and build a 4 kilometer map. Okay. Now the guy answering his questions, well, you just double everything. You double your DEM and you double all your weight maps and you're good. Okay, kinda. And I can respect that. I can see why he would think that. So, I'm not totally going to crap on his answer because, I can see how he arrived at that and I can respect that. Okay, but it's not completely right. Mostly wrong. I mean, it would work. It's right. But it's flawed because that wouldn't be the best way to go about that. All right. Now to get that 4096 by 4096. All right. So what I normally do is I take a DEM of 2048, a UPP of 2, and that gets me a 4096. All right. Now you could do, like I said, you can do a DEM of 1024 and a UPP of 4, and that will get you 4096. DEM of 4096 and a UPP of 1 will get you 4096. So right there, I just covered 3 different ways to arrive at a 4X map. And there I am saying 4X again. Damn it. See what these guys did to me? I'm much better at it, and I rarely say it anymore, but I'm trying to keep it fresh in my mind for this video. That's my excuse. All right, so there's 3 different ways that we just arrived at that 4 kilometer map. Okay. Now, it doesn't mean that every one of those ways is equal, right? Because one of those ways is probably better than the other two. All right. And this is what I'm talking about earlier, where you need to take a lot into consideration, right? The resolution of your weight maps. Your map DEM is actually a resolution in itself. So you don't want to get something so stretched out where you're using like a 1024 and you're having to scale it all the way up to a 20 or a 4096. It's going to be horrible resolution, right? And because you're going to have to use a UPP of 4, which throws everything else off. And then it's not a good way to go. It's really not. All right. So I think the best way to go in that scenario would probably be a DEM of the way I do it, a 24D8 with a UPP of 2, which gives you that overall mesh size of a 4096. But it's not to say that's the way you have to do it. Okay. And that goes for anything. That goes for your standard size map. That goes for your 4 kilometer and your 8 kilometer, which is actually a 16X, is what the community would consider a 16X, is 8 kilometers. All right. And we'll go over that really quickly because I know that doesn't make sense to some guys. All right. So let's really quickly just go over that, how one is bigger than the other. Because if you look at a 2 kilometer, right, which is your standard size map, and then you have a 4 kilometer, which is supposed to be 4 times bigger. So why is it only 4 kilometers? Right? If it was 4 times bigger, wouldn't it be 8? Yeah. Okay. That comes up an awful lot, believe it or not. So let me show you what's going on with that. All right. So let's consider this here, our standard size map. All right. So let me get back over to my pencil tool. All right. So we've got 2 kilometers this way by 2 kilometers this way. All right. So when you bump up to a 4 kilometer map, it's 4 times as big. So now you have something that looks like this. So here's your 2 kilometer. This is also a 2 kilometer. So now you got 4 kilometers this way, up and down. And then you also have a 2 kilometer here. Man, that's really bad. And a 2 kilometer there. And now you have 4 kilometers across. So it's 4 times as big. You can take one standard size map, or basically you can fit 4 standard size maps inside of one 4 kilometer. Okay. And that's the same thing when you bump up, going even bigger, right? So if you go this way, not sure if I'm doing this one right. Okay. And then you look at this, and now you're up at your 8 kilometers. You got 1, 2, 3, 4. We're talking 2 kilometers. So it would be 2, 4, 6, 8 kilometers, right? So 8 kilometers this way. And this is going to be a horrible 8 because I'm doing this with my mouse. And then 2, 4, 6, 8 kilometers this way. All right. Now these are all a regular 2 kilometer map. This is a default map. So, you got 1, 2, 3, 4 by 1, 2, 3, 4. So you got 16 times bigger. So that's how the community is coming up with those, right? Now, why does that make a difference? Why can't you just stick with that? All right. So let's double back again. I know I'm keep circling back and forth, but I'm trying to make a point here and I'm even confusing myself. So don't worry about it. All right. So like I said, there were several different ways to arrive at that 2048, 4096, and then, bigger. I'm not sure what would be the number, 8192, I guess, for a 16 kilometer or 8 kilometer. All right. But those, even though those are basically what's considered community standards, like community, the sizes everybody's used to, that doesn't mean you're locked into those sizes. All right. So let's say that you took a DEM that was, let's say 1024. Let me think. What would be a good example here? Yeah, let's use that. Let's just take a DEM that's 1024 by 1024 and a units per pixel of 1. What would that give you? Well, it would be 1024 by 1024. So basically you would have a 1 kilometer map. How would you express that in an X value, right? Would it be, you just made a 0.5X? Hey, I'm working on a 1/2 X, because you can build that map. That 1 kilometer map is absolutely 100% completely doable. Absolutely. You can go smaller. You can go all the way down to a 0.25 if you want. All right. So this is the point I'm trying to get at. All right. So now, you can take that DEM of 1024 UPP of 2 and you can get a 2048. All right. Which is your standard size map. So now you got a 1X by community standards. But let's say you move that UPP up to 3. All right. Well, how would that work now? Because now you got something completely different. You got a 3-kilometer map. All right. So is that a 1.5x? I guess, would that be right? Yeah, 1.5x, 1.5x. So you see what I mean? Where the it starts very quickly. It starts not making sense. All right. It's a lot easier to just go with kilometers. If you tell me, hey, I'm trying something different, I'm working on a 3-kilometer map, instantly I know what you're doing. I know what you're talking about. I know what size map you got going on. But if you came up today, Bauer, I'm working on this 0.5x or this 1.5x, I'm gonna be like, you're an idiot. Just go away. I wouldn't really do that, but I might think it. Probably not, but you see what I'm trying to say though, right? So it gets confusing fast, and then there's guys like that are just getting into this and they don't really know what these X's mean, or like, oh, it's 16X, and they have no clue how they even arrived at that number or what it entails and have anything to do with UPP or anything like that. Okay. So like I said, you can do lots of different sizes. I was just working on a 6-kilometer map. All right. And that was my DEM of 4096 and a UPP of 1.5. All right. So these aren't just whole numbers. You don't have to go like 1, 2, 3, and 4 with your UPP. You can go 1.5, 1.25. All right. Now you want to watch how crazy you get with the UPP, because that affects a lot of things. For one, it affects your height map, right? So the scale as far as your height map. Remember when I said it goes from 0 to 255? And the second example I gave was, now we're talking a UPP of 2. The second example I gave was 1,400 meters to 1,700 meters. It was a 300 meter difference. All right. So you wouldn't necessarily come over here to your terrain and plug in 300 meters because you have a UPP of 2. You would plug in 150 right there, or at least I would. All right. And that would be my starting point anyhow. And that would give me 300 meters. All right. So if you're doing something different and you have a UPP of 1.5, that's going to affect your height scale. Not only that, but that's going to affect when you're drawing on the ground surface, like your brush sizes. Right. So if you want to make at a UPP of 2, if you wanted to make an 8-kilometer wide road. Now this radius, I wouldn't really consider meters. I would consider that like a unit or a pixel, right? So an 8-kilometer wide road, I would draw that at 4, right? Because you got a UPP of 2. So ultimately that's how you're going to end up with your 8-kilometer or your 8 kilometers or 8 meters. All right. And you would need to do the math on that. Because like I said, you can consider that UPP a multiplier, right? And that goes against like your height scale, that goes against your DEM, that goes against your brush sizes and stuff like that. That impacts, many different things. All right. So you can come up with anything that you can think of as far as map sizes is definitely doable, right? 1 kilometer, 2 kilometer, 3 kilometer, 4 kilometer, 5 kilometer. You get the idea. Now, one thing to keep in mind when you're working with these different, if you're going to try this out, when working with these different kilometers, when it comes to tools like field dimension with bitmap and stuff like that, now you're going to run into some issues. You're going to want to be comfortable making fields the default way, the blue square method, the Giants way. All right. Because the way that those scripts are written, oh, that didn't come out right, did it? The way that they're written was basically kind of like with that power of 2, right? So that math, when you start changing up that UPP, it doesn't really come out right anymore. On my 6-kilometer map, I ended up having to scrap that because I couldn't get that script to work right. And it was just a math thing, right? Because it wasn't that nice, even power of 2, right? Because at, 4096 at UPP of 1.5, I think it comes up to like 6144, right? Really an oddball size, right? So my map itself was a 6144, hence 6 kilometers. But that didn't work well with the field dimension script. And I tried. Oh, trust me, I tried. And I got it damn close, but not enough. Not enough to make it functional or to make it, work the way that you would need it to, right? So if you're going to use like scripts like the field dimension with bitmap and stuff like that, and when you get into bigger, not necessarily bigger fields, but these crazy configurations, and most people want to do that anymore. You don't want to go with the normal square field, right? You want to mix it up a little bit, right? And it makes sense. I get it. I do the same thing. All right. But like I said, when you have a ton of fields to do on a 6 kilometer, I had damn near 200 fields. All right. And they were some really crazy shapes because it was based on a real life location. There's no way on God's green earth that I was going to do that with the blue square method. All right. So keep that in mind when you're doing anything other than your normal 2 kilometer, 4 kilometer, 8 kilometer map. All right. That definitely makes a difference. All right. So does this make any sense to you guys? I apologize. I'm not at my home computer where I can sit down and whip up some cool graphics or something like that, that some visual aids to, make you guys understand. But I guess the key takeaways here, like I said, if you're scaling up a map, you don't necessarily need to just double everything. There's many different ways to get at whatever, map, whatever dimension you're looking for, right? Like I said, if it's a 4096, a 4 kilometer map, my standard way, like I said, is a DEM of 2048 with a UPP of 2, which gives me 4096. And then this way, all of your weight maps and stuff can stay at a nice, respectable number. They're not, I think 4096 is what I have them at, right? And generally, do I have them at 40? Yeah, 4096. For me, it seems to work out that if my weight files here, right, are usually one step up from my DEM, and that's really nice resolution, right? They're not too big. The file sizes aren't all crazy, and it gives you a really decent resolution to work with. Nothing looks really blocky. Everything turns out really well. And that's what makes the difference, right? So if I was to take that DEM, and move it up to say, to change it at all, right? I would to keep things looking nice, I would also want to change the weight files and stuff like that, Like I said, all your info layers and stuff need to get changed depending on what you want to do, because they also need to fit that new map size. So you want to take a lot of things into consideration there when you're picking your numbers that you want to work with, like how you want to do it. Like, do you want to go with the UPP of 2 and DEM of 2048, or do you want to go with a DEM of 4096 and a UPP of 1? All right, and I think that would like say a DEM of 4096 and a UPP. Well, it doesn't matter what the UPP is. With a DEM of 4096, I would probably start out with my weight files being an 8192, right? Because that's the resolution that would probably work best with that configuration, right? Doesn't need to be. It's not going to look good. It's not, but it doesn't need to be. That's just the rule of thumb that I work with, right? And that has things looking good, but it doesn't need to be. You can make this weight file any resolution you want, all the way down to 512, 256 if you wanted to. It would look absolutely horrendous, but it can absolutely be done. So I don't want that. That's a big misconception with a lot of folks out there where they think that, everything needs to be doubled or everything needs to be a certain size. Like, oh, it's not the right size. Says who? You can make it any size you want. And honest to God, guys, that's the way it works. It really is. So, try something different. One of my next projects is going to be a teeny tiny map, just to goof around, and I might publish it, but it's seriously, it's going to be like 2 fields, maybe a tiny farm and a sell point. That's it. That's going to be the entire map. Right? When you back up a little too far and you're off the edge of the map, but I just want to, play around with it. Maybe I'll make my resolutions a little bit higher. You know what I mean? Because with a tiny map, you can get away with a higher resolution. You're not going to kill somebody's system with, let's say, a mesh size of 1024, like a 1 kilometer map. And, with a resolution like a weight map resolution of 4096, that should turn out pretty good. But it's something to play around with. It's, like I said, it just helps you to get an understanding of the way this stuff works. All right. So hopefully that makes a little more sense now to you guys as far as map sizes. All right. How we get at that size. what that extra pixel is for. Hopefully that makes a little more sense to you now, like why there's an extra pixel on a height map and nowhere else. Okay, that's what that's for. And concerning that extra pixel, if you're working on a map, all right, so you start working on it and you realize like, damn it, I made it 1024 by mistake. Don't worry about it. Giants Editor has you covered. Next time you go back and check that folder, it will be at 1025. It adds the extra pixel for you. Okay, so if you forget, not a big deal. It'll definitely take care of that for you. All right, so like I said, much more than one way to end up at the map size that you're trying to work with. Any map size is doable. They are, like I said, all the way down to a 0.25 kilometer to a half a kilometer, 1 kilometer, 1.5 kilometers. So you can work with any size map that you want. You are not locked into those 3 standard sizes. And I don't even want to say standard because who says they're standard? It's the only standard really is your normal Giants map, right? Well, a 2 kilometer. That's the only standard size map. Anything, like I said, anything outside of that, above or below, is a mod map. It would have to be. Okay, but it's all doable, all of it. All right, so what did I miss here? Did I go over everything? You guys understand how the mesh works and the multiplier and, And I know it's kind of confusing, like why would you even need a multiplier? And like I said, a lot of that is just to keep, the file sizes low because, with a mesh size of 2048, when you make your DEM 2048 with the UPP01, all of your other weight maps need to be a little bit bigger and things just get unwieldy. It's just a way to keep all the file sizes down to save your frame rate so you're not killing somebody's frame rate. There's a lot of factors that come into play here, right? So that's why I cringe when these guys are like, hey, I'm working on a 16, and I'm going to say it, but a 16X. I'm like, oh boy, here we go. All right. Cause I'm kind of wondering how they got at that. And it seems like any one of these 8-kilometer maps that I've inspected from the internet, I've downloaded them and I've looked at them and they have done things way differently than I ever would have. Right. And I try to at least save face a little bit as far as, the size of my weight maps and stuff like that. And I try to keep it running at least a little bit better, but the way that some of these guys have done these, I am like, oh my God, oh my God, not good. Right. As a matter of fact, I had what was I looking at? I don't want to get into it. This guy had his file sizes were so incredibly huge. It was like 16 something. Let me get a calculator real quick. I don't want to try not to do this, but I guess I'm going to have to just for my own peace of mind. All right. So he was at, was it 81.9? No, not 81.92. 16.384. Okay. Now you would almost have to do that for certain files. You probably would have to go bigger. And that's what I mean to get the proper resolution, like remember when we were talking about like field dimensions with bitmap and stuff like that. If no resolution, we're talking about that, if you need to shrink that down and get something to fit, you would actually have to increase that file size. You'd have to double it. And now you're looking at things like 16.384, but that's what all his weight maps were at 16.384. It was just unbelievable. The sizes, these things had to have been immense. And his main complaint was like Giants Editor. It was just a giant piece of crap and it was slow and he couldn't get anything done. And it was just horrible. And I'm like, what are you working on? So we looked at it. I'm like, oh my God. All right. So I'm like, have you tried this in game? Right. Did you try testing? Oh, not yet. Well, why don't you give that a shot and then see, you need to test every once in a while. You can't just keep working on your map until it's completely done and then test it. Well, I guess when he tested it, guess what? It just crashed basically. I guess it tried to load, but it couldn't, man. It's just the frame rate it would have been horrible. Trying to load up textures that are 16.384? 16.384 a piece. Just don't do it. Don't do it. Take some time. Know how everything works together. The UPP. Now that's an important number. Units per pixel is an important number because, like I said, that affects your brush sizes. That affects your height scale. That affects your overall map size. So it all goes hand in hand. And I know it's a little bit confusing, like what would be the best resolution for a DEM? What would be the difference? Why couldn't you go for, 4096? Well, like I said, just keep in mind that you have to apply weight maps to that, like, textures and stuff like that. And that's what's going to make the difference overall. All right. So do you get it? Hopefully. Yes, no, maybe so. I know. I wanted to go about this a whole different way, bunches of times. Matter of fact, I reshot this video a few different times, but it's not helping that I'm out on the road right now with work and things just, I don't know, is what it is, I guess. But I just wanted to have a brief discussion there and let you know there's a lot more to map sizes than what people think there is. And that was basically in a nutshell. So I'm going to cut this short. I don't want to drag it into an hour-long video. We're almost there anyhow. So with that being said, I am Bauer Brown, and I will see you on the next one.